whether it's a sex addiction, love addiction, or relationship addiction. Unfortunately, what happens in all of these is the core intimacy needs aren't met. And a lot of our patients do have trauma history and don't know how to be intimate with people and don't know how to get their needs met in a healthy way in relationships. And for some, it's chemicals. For some, it's shopping. For some, it's food. For some, it's sex. They're all self-medicating.
Welcome to Beyond Theory, a podcast powered by Meadows Behavioral Healthcare that brings you in-depth conversations with firsthand insights from the people on the front lines of mental health and addiction recovery. I'm David Condos, and today's guest is Meadows Senior Fellow Stefanie Carnes, who joins me for the conclusion of our two-part conversation. In this episode, she unpacks how intimacy issues develop, how sex addiction hurts partners and families, and how everyone involved can find healing. So let's get out of the abstract and see how this applies in the real world. It's time to go beyond theory. It's my pleasure to welcome back Dr. Stefanie Carnes. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So in the last part of the conversation, it was great to hear about your story, your journey, some of the work you're doing. But now I'm excited to dive in even deeper to the work you're doing here at the Willows House at the Meadows. So to start that off, specifically, you're working with women related to sex addiction. What are some of the intimacy issues that you're seeing people come in with?
Yeah, so women are really varied in terms of their intimacy-related issues, and so we have women that are come in with such a variety of different presentations, everything from infidelity to actual sex addiction, porn addiction. Today in our culture, with our culture trending to very virtual and non-relational sex, a lot of sex app use and hookups.
So kind of as the technology expands, then there's new issues that you have to learn to deal with.
Yeah, especially some of our younger people really kind of struggling with some of that stuff. But then we also get a lot of sexual trauma, and unfortunately, a lot of rape victims and people struggling with, their intimate relationships being impacted because of their sexual trauma. And we get everything from, prostituted women to women that have been trafficked to, all sorts of different presentations. The thing that they all have in common is issues around sexuality and intimacy. It's very nice because it's a small unit. We only have 10 beds. And so it's private, and they really get to know each other. And because they are dealing with a very personal and sensitive issue, it provides them a little bit more privacy and confidentiality than being at a larger facility. So that's one of the really nice things about it. And they're all working with the same things. Right. And so it really allows for some bonding around that. And then all of our education is geared around that. And so they get a lot of healthy, information on healthy sexuality and, all the technologies, and also relationship education around relationships and addiction and trauma. And so there's, it's really tailored to specifically what they need.
Yeah. And so I've heard that a lot of the women who are in that place, they don't even like to be affiliated with the term sex addiction. That's kind of something they shy away from. Kind of, why is that?
Yeah, I think that that's a term that is commonly associated with males, that, males struggle with sex addiction. And unfortunately, people don't recognize that it is something that the women struggle with as well. And so, and women sometimes don't, they identify more with relationship and love addiction. And so they don't readily come in adopting that label typically, but sometimes after that they get some education and they learn about addiction, then they sometimes later come around and recognize that is something that they're struggling with.
And so, but are those terms kind of interchangeable, or are they actually distinct pieces of the puzzle?
No, they're distinct pieces of the puzzle. So with sex addiction, it's really more about the sexual behavior itself, the acting out, actually, the orgasm and pursuing intercourse or whatever type of behavior you're involved in. With love addiction, it really revolves around a compulsive attachment to a person. And it's oftentimes a person in which you are not getting your needs met. And oftentimes it's with somebody that's somewhat avoidant. So it's a particular relationship pattern that we look at and teach them about, along the lines of Pia Melody's work. Mm-hmm. With relationship addiction, what we see is women that have multiple relationships at the same time, one after another, always having one on the back burner, or serial relationships where it's about falling in love over and over again, that kind of thing. But unfortunately, what happens in all of these is the core intimacy needs aren't met, no matter what type of addiction, whether it's a sex addiction, the love addiction, or relationship addiction. There's still intimacy disorder at the root of that. And a lot of our patients do have trauma history and come to the table with struggles with insecure attachment and don't know how to be intimate with people and don't know how to get their needs met in a healthy way in relationships. And so that's part of the education, and also combined with their trauma work and group therapy, which teaches them how to be intimate. Lots of different ways that we try and, tackle the issues. But, fundamentally, that's what many of them want in relationships that they're not getting. And it creates depression, anxiety, unhappiness.
And so different people are trying to fill that same void with all these different ways.
Right. Right. And for some it's chemicals, right. For some it's shopping, for some it's food, for some it's sex. So
it all comes back to the same stuff.
Right. They're all self-medicating.
Yeah. And so you mentioned the trauma part of this. Could you describe kind of the role that plays? Is that I imagine that's a common piece of it? Yeah,
it is. For let me start with the caveat. For most sex and love addicts, there is a trauma history there. And so basically when you're experiencing trauma and abuse, and many of them have complex trauma, which is trauma that occurred in the context of a relationship, like caregivers that were either physically, emotionally, sexually abusive, neglectful. And so they learned how to have relationships with people that were unnurturing and unsafe and not getting their needs met. And so for many of our clients, they internalize a lot of shame around that there must be something wrong with me. They internalize the message that I have to do this all on my own. I can't rely on other people. I won't get my needs met, in relationships, and insecure attachment results from all of that. So we see clients with trauma struggling in their relationships as one of the primary ways that trauma ends up manifesting as an adult. And it's unfortunate, but when you start to do the trauma work, your attachment style can change. There's a lot of research that shows you can change your attachment style with work and with, couples therapy and trauma work. So that's one of the things that we try to teach them.
Yeah. So that's kind of the hope part of this, is that even if that's your past, that there is hope. There is possible.
The other thing, just to back up a little bit, I said it with caveat that so we are seeing younger people come in that don't have as much trauma history and don't have insecure attachment, but are getting online and having early exposure to graphic content online and struggling with porn addiction and apps and things like that. that don't have that trauma history. They were just had very early exposure and, kind of this limitless novelty at a very young age. And so some people from very nurturing backgrounds getting into trouble just because of the intensity of what is online and what's available. So we do see a trend in our younger people that not all of them have that trauma history.
Yeah, but I mean, I imagine getting exposed to that at such a long age
is traumatic.
Such a young age is traumatic. Yeah,
right. That's the argument many people make is that, seeing hardcore pornography at 6, 7, 8 years old, which is very common, unfortunately, that is a traumatic event.
Yeah. And so I know another one of your focus points in this discussion is working with the couples. And you've mentioned that, and I know you've even written books on the subject. And the term that I've heard you use related to this is betrayal trauma. Could you kind of start to unpack that for us?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the partners, when sex addiction comes out and they start to learn about what's going on, they're devastated. So oftentimes they didn't know what was going on. And so many of them have symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, that they, are hypervigilant, have intrusive thinking about everything that's going on. They're very triggered and anxious about the addiction and fearful for their safety. And it's very emotional for them. And many of them struggle with just functioning. And so it's one of the things that we really try to train the addicts during the treatment process is how to help their loved ones heal from this trauma, and how to be sensitive and responsive to their partners who are hurting. And that's, there's a lot to work on there.
Cool, because they're dealing with their own trauma, and then they're having to deal with this as well with their partner. Yeah.
Absolutely, with the traumatized partner. And so from a couple's perspective, the addicts have to get honest about everything that's been happening with their partners, which again is more traumatic and difficult. And that it takes a long time to heal from all of that. A lot of people don't realize, but usually the healing process for couples can be anywhere from like 2 to 5 years. So it's very difficult. There's a major, when you've had a breach, an infidelity, a sexual betrayal, that really is devastating for the attachment bond.
It takes time to build up that trust.
Yeah, it takes a lot of time to build up that trust. So we try and help the addicts learn how to use strategies to start rebuilding trust, like being reliable, being open and honest, being trustworthy, showing up, following their treatment plans, being open about that, being sensitive to their partner's fears and responsive, and provide reassurance, be open about their recovery and things that they're working on, transparency with everything. And those kind of actions can really help a partner, and answering the partner's questions about what's been happening. And so, after the addict, takes accountability and starts moving forward in that way, partners still have a mess of feelings about all of this, and they're hurt. And so, they need the opportunity to respond and share with addicts how this has been painful for them. And so that's what my new book is going to be about, is that process of helping the couple work through that emotional journey of going from betrayed and betrayal trauma to trying to get back together as a couple. So it's a process for them. And it's, again, another message that doesn't get out there very often is that couples do heal from this. Couples get better from this. And there is treatment that's effective for sex addiction and betrayal trauma.
Yeah. Yeah, like this doesn't have to be the end of the line.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And couples basically have to, realize that the old relationship is not going to ever be what it was. It's not going to ever be the same, but they're going to develop a new relationship in recovery. And recovering addicts can make great partners. When, they're learning how to be intimate, they're learning how to be open and share on a deeper level and be better partners. But this all takes time. So, trying to help the couple hang in there and take the time to rebuild their relationship.
Yeah. And I imagine that this all sounds very, painful, difficult work. And another piece of this is actually involving the partner in the treatment process. That's a goal, right? Is to get them involved. Like, how do you go about when they've been so hurt, betrayed? How do you go about convincing them to come be a part of the treatment process as well?
Yeah. So we have a family week process. It's another one of the reasons why it's so helpful to treat intimacy disorders separate from chemical dependency, because the partner's experiences are very different. What they're wrestling with is very different than what a partner of an alcoholic is wrestling with, right? And so, having that when they come to Family Week, they're with other partners and family members that are experiencing the same thing. So again, it's a little bit more private, and they're with other people.
And they're not alone.
They're not alone, right? They recognize that they're not alone in that moment. And so we have a 5-day Family Week process. They come in, they get some education, and then the addict presents some of their assignments to the partners, shares with them some of the work that they've been doing. The partner gets the opportunity to do what we call an impact letter, where they share some of their feelings around what's been going on, and which gives the addict some perspective about what's going on with their partner. They do some boundaries work and some education, more education around sex addiction and aftercare and all of that. So it's a very intensive process for them.
Yeah. And what are some ways that you've seen that are effective in helping the partners heal? Like what are some of their breakthrough points when they're getting involved with that?
So one of the things that we do is an impact letter, as I mentioned, and it's part of the reason is that it's really important for the addict to really understand how this has impacted their partner. Like we need in order for there to be some healing going forward, the addict has to get it and really understand that, and
have to come face to face
with that. And the partners need to feel heard. And so it's really discusses some of the pain points that are there that are unresolved, and puts it on the table to be wrestled with. And this gives the addict an opportunity to really hear of how their addiction has impacted their loved one. It's a wake-up call sometimes. Another point of education around betrayal trauma and how this has impacted their loved one. And it also gives them the opportunity to respond to their partner and let them know, I do understand. So that's an important connection for that partner to feel heard. What we recommend on an ongoing basis is that over time, the addict does what we call is an emotional restitution letter and an amends process to help the partner know that they understand, how much they hurt them, and to make a formal amends. So, those take time. Sometimes they do a little impact letter in treatment, and then they do a longer, more involved one when they go home. So it doesn't all happen in the Family Week process. Family Week is the beginning of a healing journey. So they need to continue in couples therapy when they go home. You can only do so much in 5 days. And that's how treatment is too. We talk to the addicts get a lot of work done in the 45 days that they're here, but it's the beginning of their journey. They have to, the people that are successful in long-term recovery are the people that stay in long-term recovery. And so we want them to continue to be invested in their work and very involved in the treatment process going forward. And that definitely includes couple and family work.
Right. And so you mentioned family there. And I think when you're looking at like the Willow House, for example, these women, some of them are going to be moms. Yeah. And so you have kids involved. And I imagine, this is obviously very hard on the partners, but it, can be very hard on the kids as well. So
Absolutely.
How do you see that impact children when their mom is going through this? And then how do you help them kind of understand what's going on?
Yeah, so it really varies on a case-by-case basis because you have situations in which, like, on the one hand, where the kids know nothing, they don't know what's going on, they have no information, and they've been, they're
in the dark
yeah. around everything. And then you have other situations where they know everything and they know too much.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
More than their age.
More than they should. And you sometimes have situations where children are going to be told information that is really not age appropriate for them because they have to. Like, let's say there's some public embarrassment, or dad's going to be on the 6 o'clock news, or, there's, situations sometimes where the children get a lot of information that they really don't need to have, or, they need to have.
In a perfect world, they shouldn't have to deal with that.
They shouldn't have to. Right, exactly. And that is traumatic for them. I mean, we talk about betrayal trauma for the partners, but we also we call it sex addiction induced trauma for the children. And so that can be really traumatic, and kids can have all sorts of reactions to their parents' addiction, confusing feelings like, am I going to be a sex addict too? Can I be around that person? Is it safe for me to be around that person? Right. Anger at the parents, loyalty, feeling like they need to protect the parents, feeling like they need to take care of everything.
There's a wide variety of reactions.
Huge variety of reactions. And some of them have had to keep secrets, which is painful, right. Or take on the shame around the behavior, even though it's not them. They'll, feel ashamed of it, feel like they can't tell anybody about it. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of support that's been created for children. So there's, very few books and resources for kids. There's very few groups for kids. So, getting them some therapy, some, family therapy can be one way that they can get some healing around it.
Yeah. And how do you involve them? Like at the Willow House, how do you involve the kids?
So it depends. We tend to not involve younger children. Sure. And so that's just because of, if we have mature, older adolescents that we've deemed that it's appropriate, then, they can be involved. But typically at Family Week, with the kind of stories and things that get shared, it's not appropriate for most children at Family Week. But we do recommend that they get ongoing family therapy on an ongoing basis. Now, we do get, as I mentioned, sometimes we'll take older adolescents or adult children, and we get adult children to come all the time to Family Week. And they can also get some healing around what's been going on by education and learning and different processes in family therapy.
And so it sounds like there's a lot of like pain. It's a hard, like difficult thing to do, but obviously you're passionate about it. Mm-hmm. This is your life calling. So there is hope there. So like what's your favorite part about getting to do this work?
It's wonderful. I mean, it's wonderful to see people get better. Like, we had a patient not that long ago who got her, when she was in treatment, got her kids removed from the home. And that was obviously a very trying experience for her. And she's been out for a year, and she just got her kids back. So it's wonderful to see those successes and, to see people heal and get better, and they do. And it's awesome.
Yeah. Well, to wrap up, we'll just look at a couple, like a bigger picture questions. So first of all, what would be one resource, one book related to this that you would recommend somebody if they wanted to dive in further?
Yeah. One of the books that we use as a core piece of the curriculum for our ladies at Willow House is called The Betrayal Bond by Pat. I think it's his best book.
Yeah.
And so
that's your father, Patrick Carnes, for everyone who may not know. Yeah.
And he has a lot of incredible books. He's an amazing writer. But this one is really fantastic for women with intimacy disorders, because it basically looks at all the ways that trauma impacts your life that you might not be aware, and how it plays into your relationships, and how it impacts, may be contributing to you being in unhealthy and exploitive relationships without you really understanding some of what's behind that. So it's an awesome book. It's I think very well written. Yeah. I'm a little biased. It is my dad, right? So, but it's fantastic. So I would recommend that book.
Like a good place to start. Yeah. And so finally, what would be a piece of advice that you would recommend, that you would like to leave listeners with, that something that's meant a lot to you, or something that you've seen have a meaningful impact on other people's lives?
Yeah, I think I would just tell people that if anybody's out there that is listening, so many times I've heard stories of people that just decide to struggle in silence around this and don't feel like they want to take this kind of thing to their grave. And the message that I've been trying to, get out to people is that this is, more common than you think, and there's more help for you than you probably imagine, and success is possible. So I would just leave them with that idea that you can put your life back together, you can, restore your relationships, and get back on the path.
Dr. Stefanie Carnes is a senior fellow with the Meadows and also serves as the clinical architect for the Willow House in Wickenburg, Arizona. You can find out more about Stefanie's team and what that program offers at willowhouseforwomen.com. To check out more episodes of this podcast and find all kinds of other resources and tools from Meadows Behavioral Healthcare, visit beyondtheorypodcast.com. Finally, thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another episode of Beyond Theory.